When I was in university, I had to take a language course to fulfill my classical civilizations degree. I could have chosen ancient Greek or Latin, but there was a course that was available that kind of intrigued me because I thought maybe I can use this later in life. And it was Latin and Greek in scientific terminology. The description was very appealing. It said that you'll take this course, you'll remember this stuff, and then you'll actually use it later in life. And it was actually a fantastic course taught by a professor who looked like Einstein with huge crazy white hair, who prefaced the class by actually saying out loud, "You're going to think that you won't remember this, and I guarantee that for the rest of your life you're going to remember this stuff. Words will pop up always and you'll be able to pick them apart." He was right. There's so much from that course that has stayed with me. And the word that I was picking apart the other day was nostalgia. Algia is the condition of causing pain or feeling pain. The IA is condition of. Algos is pain, the condition of pain. And nostos is the ancient Greek word for returning home. It is kind of the key word that summarizes Homer's Odysseus. Homer's The Odyssey of Odysseus returning home. So nostalgia literally means the condition of pain related to returning home. If I were to look at my life, and my life is movement, my life is something that is actually in motion, what I kind of see is that my life is moving like this. It's moving forward, but as it's moving, there's this current underneath, and the current underneath is sort of circular in motion. There's a contrasting motion underneath, and it's kind of spinning. And there are times when it's spinning faster, and there are times when it slows down, and the fast spinning doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. But I see that motion as something wonderful and necessary for my life to be good. And I kind of see that circular motion as a fire of sorts, a fire that keeps my life going. And to that fire, I feel like I have always, even well before I was able to articulate this, I always added fuel to that fire. And that fuel over the years has come in different forms, but the main things that fuel that fire are my work. And the work has been so varied over the years, but I've been very lucky to figure out how to do work and earn a living doing things that I mostly love doing. Another thing that fuels that fire is exercise. I love riding my bike, I love swimming, I love going to the gym, I love walking. Physical exercise has kept that going. Good food, healthy food, nourishing myself with stuff that not only tastes wonderful, but that I know is good for me, keeps that going. Being bad sometimes, like giving myself a break from exercise and good food, also keeps that going. Getting wasted sometimes. And then art. Art is another huge part of that fuel. Playing music, learning how to play a musical instrument, painting, drawing, pottery, going to school for all that stuff. And then I identified recently that another major source of fuel for that fire is nostalgia. Something that even when I was a little kid, I was somehow using to make me feel alive. And for me, as an adult, there are multiple ways that I bring nostalgia into my life, but I've identified three main ways that I leverage nostalgia to fuel my life. The first thing that is an actual tangible thing that I really do use for nostalgia are photographs. Good old-fashioned actual printed photographs. I was born in a time when photographs meant something that you printed and held. My parents, all of my older relatives would take rolls of film to Black's Photography in Toronto and have their negatives developed and then printed into prints. So what that has resulted in is boxes full of photo albums, which now are mostly in the possession of my sister, my older sister, but I have a couple. And this one that I'm holding is an album of my parents visiting Sri Lanka right after they were married. And my dad took all these pictures. And it was when my dad and my mom went to Jaffna, the very northern part of Sri Lanka, where all of their ancestors were from. My mom hadn't been there in 6 or 7 years, I think, after she had gone to Canada. So this was sort of a return home, although she really did consider Canada her home. And there are wonderful pictures like this. My mom standing with my dad's grandmother, my grandma's mom, in the kitchen. And I will often take out this album and just look. And I love looking at all of the details. Like, I love noticing things like the clay pots that are on the bottom shelf. Clay pots just like the clay pots I brought back from Ceylon, and that they're sitting on a little ring that is covered in palm leaves, like a woven sort of a trivet. And I have a few of those. It's just a wonderful, wonderful thing to look at a world that doesn't really exist anymore, a world that I was not born into, but through a photograph to imagine what it was like, and to pair this photograph with all of the reminiscing that I've heard over the years, not only from my parents, but from my extended relatives. One of the albums that I don't have in my possession that my sisters have in Toronto is my parents' wedding album, and it was photographed by my mom's brother, who has truly a photographer's eye. He took pictures like he was a professional photographer, and they are works of art, these photographs. And I often look at those pictures, and specifically of my mom as she was getting dressed, and they say many things to me. You know, my mom was constantly reminding me that the most important thing that I should be focusing on as a young person was school. Pariputan mokyam. Studies are the most important thing. And she said that because she would actually follow that up by saying, I don't want you children to go through what I went through. My mom didn't go to university and didn't have a college or university degree, and she wanted us to study and have degrees so that we could get good jobs, so that we could properly pay for life. This was the template that she believed was the most secure way of living life, and she was constantly putting that into our heads. And when I look at those wedding photos, I see that I learned so much more from my mom about what not to do. And I'm not judging, because her life was her life, and she grew up in a very different time and world than the world in which I grew up. But those pictures are so beautiful. And then you turn the page and there's a photo of her in tears. And the tears they look like they're coming from a place of fear and some kind of pain. And that's just a guess of mine. But I knew what happened to my mom. 25 years of a very difficult marriage, and she said so. And I look at that picture, and throughout my childhood, I would look at those pictures, and those pictures would sort of show me something. Make your own decisions if you can. Go against the grain if you must. Listen to what you hear inside. Don't do just what society is telling you to do, or don't do what everybody else is doing just because that's what everybody else is doing and it seems safe. And I have used those photographs for that. There's a wonderful old Tamil movie from my parents' childhood, the golden era of Tamil cinema, and it's called Par Magale Par. Look, daughter, look. And the language is so beautiful that even in the subtlety of the word daughter, the word for daughter can just be Magal. So the title could be Par Magal Par, but Magale Par it's an embellishment of the word daughter to insinuate love and care and a bit of affection to the word daughter, like a coaxing into look, daughter, look. Not just look, daughter, look, but look, lovely daughter, look. And when I look at the pictures of my mom in her wedding album, somehow that title comes into my head, although I'm not the daughter, I'm the son. Par Magale Par. Look. Look how pretty everything is on the surface. But think about what this action right here in these photographs is leading to. It's a life decision. It's a very big life decision. And maybe it wasn't even my mom's life decision. Maybe it was kind of made for her, because that's the environment in which she lived. But it's really useful in a nostalgic way, because there is pain associated with it, and beauty and appreciation for something that just is. And I use that. So that's old photographs, but the thing that I have done throughout my adult life is I get photographs printed. I think it's so easy to take the pictures and to have the intention of having the pictures printed, and then to just forget about it and to continue taking pictures. But I actually print pictures out, like the best ones, the most meaningful ones to me, and then I put them in albums. And these pictures, they become nostalgic to me. They're pictures of my own life, and every now and then I'll take my album down and I will just flip through the pages. Here's my friends and me in Paris. There's Jack and Laura, and I think I'm here. And I use corners to put the photos in. One of these albums, inspired by the Netflix movie To All the Boys I've Loved Before, one of the albums is a documentation of all of the boys I've ever loved. And their photographs printed and put into an album. And I have to say that even though there's a little bit of melancholy associated with some of them, it does make me happy to flip through the pages and to look at them, to remember the wonderful times that we had together. Some Mean Girls things. Oh. Photographs. Photographs are, I think, such a wonderful thing to to have in your life, actual photographs that you can have printed. The second thing that I use to leverage nostalgia is music, and I think this is something that's extremely common. Music sits in the front part of our brains, and it has the power to trigger feelings and emotions immediately before the rest of your brain can actually process the words that are associated with a certain time and place in your life. You'll hear a song and you'll feel an emotion that is connected with when you first learned that song, or it's associated with the emotions that are tied to when you first heard that song. I use that. And for me, there are lots of modern songs that I like, but the songs that I love that have staying power in my life are old songs. So many of the songs that I listen to when I'm on my own are the songs from these old Tamil movies, from the golden era of Tamil cinema. They're the songs that were always in the background as I was growing up at home. When we would visit relatives, they would have cassette tapes in the VCR with these black and white clips playing with the music from their childhood. So because of that, my cousins and I and my sisters were familiar with this music. And as an adult, I have grown to absolutely love those songs. So not only do I listen to them, but there are so many times during the day when I sing aloud. And sometimes it'll just be one line, but it'll be this feeling inside of me, like a bird that needs to just sing. And all my friends and my family, they know, they know that it just has to come out, and that the lines are associated with a sort of beauty, or an emotion. Like the one that I'm always singing is Pongum nilave mangeye pole, Pongum nilave.
Pongum nilave mangeye pole, Pongum nilave mangeye pole, Uralum kadal.
That's a really old song, sung by M.L. Vasantakumari. And this is something that I'm just always doing that. So the music, there's one thing about listening to the music, but there's another thing entirely about singing it. And with some of the old, like the folk songs, or even the classical pieces of music, I don't know where this came from, but when I started really being intrigued by certain operatic pieces, I would look up the lyrics and I would look up the words, and then I would just learn them. And that has added such a wonderful facet to this leveraging music as something nostalgic in a good way. When I feel despair, when I feel sort of sadness for the world, and I know it's beyond my control, like I'm talking big issues, like world issues that one person might be able to contribute something positively to but can't change, music comes into my head. And often it's a music associated with prayer. The two things that come into my head is a classical Tamil piece from the classical Carnatic South Indian music world, Kallarkum Katravarkum, and the lyrics are Kallarkum Katravarkum Karipar Kallarkum Katravarkum Kaliparudum Kalipe. I've just butchered that. those aren't the words, but the gist of the song is to the crook and the wise person. It's a contrast through the whole song, to the blind and to the seeing, to the one who tricks you and to the one who teaches you. I pray. I pray that you will make it okay for everyone. And there's a line in there of you're standing in the middle, and they are the same to you. And that concept is reflected in another piece that I really, really love. And it's actually from an opera. It is a prayer, but it's from an opera by my favorite composer, Verdi, Giuseppe Verdi. And it's from the opera Otello. And at the end of Otello, well, not the end, but there's a part in Otello where Desdemona, his wife, prays. And she sings Ave Maria. And it's not the Ave Maria that most of us know by Schubert. It's Verdi's Ave Maria. And it is maybe my favorite piece of all the repertoire in opera. It is so simple, it is so quiet, but it sounds so pure. And this was Verdi's mastery of taking an emotion and linking it to an action and adding music to it and just making it a masterpiece. And I find, so there was a point where I did look up the words, and I had listened to it so much that it was just memorized in my head. And often it's at night when I'm riding my bike and I'm kind of alone on the streets of New York or in Munich. I'm on the bike path or I'm on a cobblestone street, and there's a part of that prayer. Per noi tu prega, prega sempre e nell'ora della morte nostra. Pray always. Pray for all of us, and especially at the hour of our death. And I've lost loved ones, and I've often thought about that last hour. And there's something so accurate about that line being sung in the opera. When that music and those lyrics come together, e nell'ora della morte. At the hour of death, it's comforting to me. And I think this is the reason why nostalgia is the word, is because there is this pain, but there's also something so beautiful about the comfort that nostalgia provides. So that's music. That's me using music to leverage nostalgia. And the third last thing, major thing that I use for nostalgia are books. I'm always reading. I'm reading new things all the time. But I'm also always reading old things. I'm currently still reading one of the volumes of Virginia Woolf's journals, and these old things lead to other things, and reading about another time has always informed my present life. It's easy to lament about the time in which we're living and to think, God, could it be any more awful than this? Well, being more familiar with human events throughout history has helped me come to terms with the fact that there will always be difficult times in this world through every era, and unfortunately people suffer, and we don't want that, but it does happen. Reading Virginia Woolf's journals a few months ago, it was during the First World War, and so many tiny details taught me so much about what people were doing on a day-to-day basis in London to cope. Diving deeper into obscurity in things like Virginia Woolf's journal have led to connections with my own personal history. Her husband spent a period of time in Sri Lanka, which I discovered, and then I got a book called Woolf in Ceylon. And when I was reading that book, which is a book that was written not too long ago, when I was reading that book, it had excerpts from his personal diaries, his account of living in Ceylon. And after reading Woolf in Ceylon, I thought, I have to get Leonard's book and read that. So I got that, and that's this right here. Leonard Woolf, Growing, an autobiography of the years 1904 to 1911. And this is where, strangely, I never thought that I would have anything at all personally connected to Virginia Woolf. But then to read of Leonard Woolf arriving in Ceylon at the time in 1904 and then being posted in Jaffna, and him leaving Colombo, the main city, and having to make the journey to Jaffna, and how arduous that journey was, I was just covered in goosebumps as I read this. Traveling through it by road, this is the jungle, all you see is the two unending solid walls of trees and undergrowth on either side of you. The green walls are high enough to prevent the slightest eddy of wind stirring the hot air. The jungle is almost always completely silent. All the way up to Elephant Pass, I saw hardly any birds and no animals, except once or twice the large gray Wanderoo monkey loping across the road or sitting in attitudes of profoundest despair upon the treetops. Except in the few villages through which we passed, we met scarcely any human beings. In the day, the heat and dust were terrific. The bullock cart creaked and groaned and rolled one about from one side until one's bones and muscles and limbs creaked and groaned and ached. The bullock cart. You know, I'm reading his book, and I'm just seeing the photos. So this is what happens in my life and what has happened through the years. I listen when there's sort of a calling to dive deeper into some kind of nostalgia. I go looking and exploring, and I find things like this. There are things that are so much older than this that I also lean into. And those old things are often the classics. This is Ovid's Metamorphoses. So I'm going to tell you a little story, and that's how I'm going to close this video. Last summer, I might have talked about this before. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself. But last summer, I rode to Brooklyn with a friend to visit another friend, and we spent the evening, the three of us together in Greenpoint. And then the one friend and I had to ride back to Manhattan, where we both live. And my friend said that we should take the Manhattan Bridge, which I have never crossed by bike before. So it was very unfamiliar to me. It was a warm evening, probably in July or August, and it was about 2 a.m. So there was hardly anybody around. And my friend went in front of me, and I followed him, and he has a modern bike. My bike is over 100 years old, so I really was trying to keep up, but also I was trying to be careful and not ride too fast. I always ride very cautiously, so I was balancing both. And he was in front of me when we made it to the Brooklyn side of the Manhattan Bridge. And we started curving around these passageways that were flanked by very tall stone walls. So we were kind of enclosed within these stone walls, and then the pathways went up, and we were on the bridge. And it was kind of scary. Not really scary because it was dangerous, because there was nowhere to go except forward or backwards. But really, no one else was on the bridge, and he was in front of me, and we were going up, and there was a point where I realized he hadn't looked back once at me, and it kind of just hit me. And at that moment, what came into my head, just popped into my head, was Orpheus. So we're going up the bridge, we reach the height of the bridge, and then we start going down. And there was the point when we started going down where I was still on the other edge of this slope, and he disappeared. So I make it up, and he's now well in front of me, and still he hadn't looked back. And there's really only one way to go, so he knows I'm behind him. And then he sort of turns the curve once we're in Manhattan and I can't see him, and I follow down the bridge. And when we get to the light at the end of the bridge, I'm beside him. So that was that. But the reason I thought of Orpheus was because what struck me as strange about this interaction between me and my friend was that when I'm on a bike and when someone's behind me, when I'm riding with my friend, I do always have this instinct to turn around and to just make sure they're there. But it occurred to me when he didn't look over his shoulder at me that it's more than just checking if they're there. There is something about a bit of affection and caring to just say, I'm looking at you, I'm acknowledging you, and that's turning over your shoulder. Now, to get back to Orpheus, for those of you that don't know this ancient Greek myth, the story is that Orpheus, a musician, had just married Eurydice, a maiden, and on their wedding day, while frolicking through the fields, a serpent bit her, and she died, and she was taken to the underworld. And Orpheus was inconsolable, so he decided to go to the underworld to try to get her back. And he makes the long journey to the underworld and stands before the queen and king of the underworld, Hades and Persephone, and he sings a song with his lyre, and his voice and his music is so beautiful that tears are shed by those who never shed tears. So they do something, the king and the queen of the underworld do something that they never do. They say, okay, you can take her back. But there's one condition. You will go first, and she will be behind you, and you cannot look over your shoulder at her until you are back on the overworld. Do you understand? And he says, yes. So this is what happens. I'm going to read the part of just going a little back in the story where he's singing to them. Oh, no, I shouldn't do this. Okay, well, the whole point is, on the bridge, when that happened, there was a moment where, see, I'm getting ahead of myself. There was a moment when my friend didn't look over his shoulder. I started to question this myth, because I'm going to tell you the ending of the story. They're walking. Orpheus is in front of Eurydice, and as they're almost back to the overworld, he looks over his shoulder, and she's there, and then she is taken back to the underworld, and she's not given to him. So the story as I knew it for over 20 years, I don't know, I was a kid when I became familiar with this myth, was that he shouldn't have looked over his shoulder. Otherwise, he would have had her. He should have resisted the temptation. Why did he do that? Stupid Orpheus. But as we were going up over the bridge, and it was so dark and ominous, and my friend didn't look over his shoulder once, that's when I started to question if I actually understood what the myth was about. Maybe the myth wasn't about him being unsure and looking over his shoulder and that being his fault of why this didn't work. Maybe it was about something else. Maybe it was about real love, that for him, had he not looked over his shoulder, they might have lived happily ever after, but maybe she would have had this feeling in her of, and you didn't look back over your shoulder to just look at me. And that will always be there with me, even though we enjoy the rest of our life together. I don't know, but there was this big question mark. And when we got to the bottom of the bridge, this is the point of this story, I made a note that I was going to get a copy of Metamorphoses, and I was going to read the translation to see if there was anything in there alluding to love being the whole point of this. And sure enough, there was. So now I will go back to the place where Orpheus is singing his song. As he sang these words to the music of his lyre, the bloodless ghosts were in tears. Tantalus made no effort to reach the waters that ever shrank away. Ixion's wheel stood still in wonder. The vultures ceased to gnaw Titus's liver. The daughters of Danaus rested from their pitchers, and Sisyphus sat idle on his rock. Then, for the first time, they say, the cheeks of the Furies were wet with tears, for they were overcome by his singing. The king and queen of the underworld could not bear to refuse his pleas. They called Eurydice. She was among the ghosts who had but newly come, and walked slowly because of her injury. Thracian Orpheus received her, but on the condition that he must not look back until he had emerged from the valley of Avernus, or else the gift he had been given would be taken from him. Up the sloping path, through the mute silence they made their way, up the steep, dark track, wrapped in impenetrable gloom, till they had almost reached the surface of the earth. Here, anxious in case his wife's strength be failing, and eager to see her, the lover looked behind him, and straightway Eurydice slipped back into the depths. Orpheus stretched out his arms, straining to clasp her and be clasped, but the hapless man touched nothing but yielding air. Eurydice, dying now a second time, uttered no complaint against her husband. What was there to complain of, but that she had been loved? With a last farewell, which scarcely reached his ears, she fell back again into the place from which she had come. And there it was. This myth, this story that I had learned so long ago, that I thought was about someone being foolish, and anxious and rushing, there's a kernel in there about something that I didn't know until I was on the bridge with my friend and he didn't look over his shoulder. And this is really, for me, how I take my real life and I pull. I pull from the photographs and I pull from the music and I pull from the books on a regular basis to infuse nostalgia into the most ordinary of events